Now we have Marta Navarrete with us. She's from France of Supergrid from Belgium. So she will ask us the question, why a supergrid for Europe?
Hello. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Marta Navarrete, and I represent Friends of the Supergrid, which is an initiative that I want to present to you today. My presentation is a little bit different from the ones before. First of all, because I will be talking about the future. Well, just like Agustin was saying, the mesh grid for the future. And I will not be talking about the technical aspects, but more about the regulation. So the common rules that are needed at European level to develop this mesh grid that we call Supergrid. So first of all, I will introduce you our association, the Friends of the Supergrid, who we are. Then I will briefly talk about what is the supergrid, but this, I think it was more or less clear from the previous presentations. Also, I will try to talk about the benefits of this mesh grid, which are quite important. I would also like to mention where are we today in terms of the regulatory framework at European level. And then what is required to move forward. Friends of the Supergrid is an industry initiative consisting of a group of companies that believe that to have a truly integrated internal energy market in Europe and to be able to integrate large renewable energy sources, we need a better grid. And this is what we call the supergrid. All these companies share a mutual interest in influencing the policy and the regulatory framework that is needed to enable this supergrid. Which companies are members of this initiative? Well, we have companies from the entire supply chain. We have the companies that will deliver the infrastructure and the technology, like for instance ABB, and we have the companies that will develop, that will install the cables, that will own the assets, and that will operate them. So this is probably our added value. We really represent actors from the whole supply chain. So what is the supergrid? The definition that we give of this supergrid is a pan-European transmission network able to ensure balancing and transportation of electricity over long distance. We actually believe that the supergrid will be the fundamental architecture of Europe generation and supply. The supergrid will be the highways or the high-speed trains to connect, to deliver electricity over long distance. The difference between the traditional national transmission networks and this concept of the supergrid is that the supergrid will allow to develop renewable energy sources and to, from where they are optimally produced, and not where is convenient for the transmission system. So we have areas in Europe with high renewable energy potential, wind in the north, solar in the south. The idea is to be able to connect all these to the consumption centers. But for this, we need a better grid. So what will be the benefits of this supergrid? Well, first of all, we believe that if we really want to move forward to a decarbonized electricity sector in the future, it is a prerequisite. It will allow us to have a stable and secure sources of generation that come from natural resources. It it is also the hardware of the single electricity market in Europe. We cannot have a market if we don't have interconnections. This is quite clear. And well, in the long term, we believe it will reduce prices of electricity because we will be able to balance electricity across different regions and across different markets, and this will optimize the generation mix in Europe and will reduce prices. And of course, security of supply, this is right now quite at the top of the agenda in Europe because of the Ukrainian crisis. So it's a solution to ensure our security of supply for the future. And also something very important is these new technologies, these new developments will create skilled employment opportunities. And this is something Europe needs. We are suffering from lack of competitiveness. So we really need new technologies and new areas where we can excel, and this is one of them. We have European companies that are leaders in HVDC technology, ABB, we have Siemens, we have Alstom. We have, on the other hand, emerging markets in the US, in China, that want to buy this technology. So it's a very important opportunity for Europe. We have to make sure that we remain the leaders. And, but on the other hand, we have also to create an internal demand in Europe and a market for this in Europe. Yeah, well, the previous presentations were about the technology, and, well, for us, in Friends of the Supergrid, we are organized, we have several working groups. We have one working group which is dealing with regulatory issues. We have another working group that is dealing with the technology, and they actually publish a technology roadmap that shows that the technology will be there. The blocking obstacle is not the technology. What we see as the blocking point is actually the regulation. There are many issues that need to be solved. For instance, who owns this supergrid? This is very costly infrastructure connecting 2 or more countries. Who will pay for this? How will we finance all these investments? Who will operate it? And who regulates it? Is it at European level? Is it at national level? These are questions that are still open. So now I would like to take a step backwards and look at the electricity system in Europe for the last 20 years and try to look at what has happened. The idea of the liberalization of the electricity sector and the idea of creating an internal market the idea behind was to make sure that electricity could flow between countries in the same way that it flows within one country. And the objective of this was to increase competition and, in the long run, to reduce prices, no? And of course, to increase security of supply. So now, this first idea of liberalization was introduced around 20 years ago, and since then there had been many changes in the system, motivated for liberalization purposes, but also for sustainability. So we first of all we see that the transmission system has changed. Unbundling, for example, is a key aspect that took place in the past because it was decided that in order to ensure that there is no discrimination between system users, it was necessary to unbundle the TSOs in Europe. And now we can say today that the large majority of TSOs are certified according to the provisions of the third energy package. This is a very important step forward. Then we have this tendency of greening. Right now in Europe, 23% of the renewable, 23% of the generation comes from renewable energy sources, and this is the average in Europe. We've seen that in countries like Spain, this is much higher. And this has revolutionized the way the grids are operated. And this greening tendency will increase in the future, so we have to be ready. And then we have this smartening tendency. We have the new ICT technologies. We've seen today the technology is evolving, and this allows us to operate the grid in a different way. We will have the push-up of demand response, certainly in the future, that will make demand elastic, probably one day. And then, of course, the final thing is efficiency. We see a tendency to increase the efficiency, the way we operate the grid, and so on. So, following these trends, there has been, since 20 years, a lot of legislation introduced at European level, and this legislation has resulted in the market we have today, you know? And I would like just to go through these key legislative developments that took place, that have taken place in the last 18 years. So the first big step was the first electricity directive, which introduced the first unbundling provisions. Following that, we have had a second electricity directive, and then the third energy package. All of them coming forward with more increasing measures to liberalize the markets and to create the internal market. We have rules for third-party access. We have now, in theory, independent national regulatory authorities. And finally, with the third package, we have a body that is coordinating all these regulators at European level, ACER, and we have ENSOE, which is in charge also on the cooperation of TSOs, and is in charge of coming up with common rules for the European grid, so the network codes, and also the TYNDP, which is the basis for a planning at European level. And then we have the energy and climate package, which was an important milestone introduced in 2007. It's the first time that Europe had a real policy, long-term policy for Europe. This was also reflected in the reform of the Treaty of Lisbon. So now, for the first time, with the Lisbon Treaty, energy has a legal basis as one of the shared European Union competences. So before it was just the competence of the states. Now it's a shared competence. And thanks to that, the Commission could put forward the 2020 objectives, which are common objectives for Europe. And after that, Commission was able to push forward for legislations that enable that we reach these targets. For instance, the Renewable Energy Directive that has created all the national regulatory action plans, all the support schemes. Then we have the Energy Efficiency Directive. And then we had last year the Energy Infrastructure Regulation, which is a key milestone in the development of interconnections. It actually comes forward with the famous projects of common interest that identify those projects that are essential for Europe if we want to reach our policy targets, energy policy targets. And finally, in the future, because 2020 is just around the corner, we have the Council that endorsed last month the 2030 targets. And following that, there will be more legislative developments for sure to make sure that we are able to attain those objectives. So as you can see, a lot of legislation, many things have been done, and we have had quite some programs. For instance, the market coupling is a great success. We are leaders in renewables. Europe is a leader in renewables. Wholesale prices have decreased. So these are important steps, but still we see that national markets operate independently in Europe, and they share very limited resources. We still have expensive energy. Even though wholesale prices have decreased, this has not been translated to the final consumer because there are still a lot of taxes, a lot of levies. In addition, the development of renewables now puts us in a situation where we also have to subsidize other types of technologies to ensure integration of renewables, so the capacity payments. And also, we see that there are still quite some parts of Europe that remain isolated islands. For instance, the UK, the Baltic states, and the Iberian Peninsula is one of the concrete examples. And when you look at the TYNDP 2014, that it's going to be published in December, so next month, the TYNDP looks at the projects that need to be there up to 2030, that are projects of importance for Europe. And we see that under all the scenarios developed by ENSOI, the Iberian Peninsula will remain isolated, so poorly interconnected, even in 2030. So this shows that there is something that is not working well. If our plans of today for 2030 already assume that we will not be able to interconnect well the Iberian Peninsula, we have a problem. And then the adoption of the network codes has been delayed. These are the rules that will help us to operate the system on a European level. But today there is still not a single network code of electricity that has been officially adopted. And then we have there was this deadline to complete the internal energy market by 2014 that will clearly be missed. And in conclusion, we still see that Europe remains fragmented and that we have 28 different markets. So where do we see that progress is required? And here you have a picture of the governance. Well, this is a picture I took from one of our members from RTE, and I think it's good because it reflects very well the governance system at European level that we have now, a mess, a complete mess. We have many bodies, the European Commission, the Agency for the Cooperation of Regulators, we have ENSOI, we have all the different national regulatory authorities for each country, we have the TSOs, and then we have other lobby groups with their own interest. It's very complex, it's extremely complex governance system. We have some high-level directives. The 2020 Energy and Climate Package is an example. We will now have a better view on the 2030 framework, but still there is not a true European policy. And for example, when you look at Germany, that after the Fukushima disaster decided to close down all the nuclear power plants without looking at the consequences, not only for their system, but for the neighboring countries. Well, this shows that energy is not a European issue, it's still national. And also, the number of legislation, the number of pages of regulation is amazing. I work for a Belgian consultancy firm. We are also members of Friends of the Supergrid, but we published a book that is called EU Electricity Law Book, and it's just a compilation of the legislation that is applicable nowadays in Europe in electricity. And we have more than 2,000 pages. It's impossible for an investor to follow. It's very complicated. We need some stability. We need some smart and efficient regulation. And we need to increase the cooperation between the countries. And this should start probably with regional approaches. And one concrete example of where a regional approach clearly makes sense is actually the North Sea. The North Sea is the region in Europe with the highest offshore wind potential, and it has the advantage that there is nothing. So we have to more or less start from scratch. It's not like continental Europe where we have already the grids and the generation. No, here we have several countries, we have plans to increase, to build offshore wind farms, and we believe that it would make sense to work together. But this is not the case now. If you want to build a wind farm in the North Sea, you have, and you would like to export it to, you want to build it, I don't know, in the UK and export your energy to Finland, for example, you have 2 different support schemes, you have 2 different network charges, you have different balancing responsibilities, so it's very difficult. And also, a big cost of developing this offshore grid in the North Sea will be the cost of the grid. We need to be able to connect those offshore farms to the inland, and you have 2 ways of doing that. You can do it following the traditional approach, so each country develops its RES farms and connect it to onshore, or you can connect the wind farms in offshore hubs and then link it to several countries. But for that, you need a regional approach. You need institutions that sit together and define clear targets, a good regulatory framework to actually exploit the resources on a coordinated way. And you also need to have a body that is ensuring an efficient and the optimal planning for the whole region. There is a study from the Commission published this year that examines and makes an analysis of the benefits of a mesh grid compared to the traditional point-to-point connection, and it actually shows, it proves that it has, even if in the lowest wind scenarios, we achieve 1.5 billion euros per year of savings. And the savings could go up to 4 billion if with higher wind scenarios. So it's a no-regret solution. And this also leads to better interconnected systems, access to neighboring energy markets. It reduces the curtailment of the offshore wind, and it reduces the CO2 emissions because we have to build shorter cables and fewer cables, and it's also better from the point of view of permitting, no? Because it's you have less cables. So where are some of the problems that we see today? We see reality is sort of phone shopping. You have countries with very high rate of returns for the transmission assets. For instance, Germany is an example, and you have, for example, Belgium with lower rate of returns. If I were an investor, I would choose the country with a higher rate of return. But this doesn't mean that the infrastructure is more needed there than in the other part of Europe. This is the same that happened with renewable energies, by the way. The renewables have not always been built where it is more optimal, but where the subsidies were higher. So this is more expensive. If you think in European terms, this doesn't make much sense. But for that, we need a European view and a European voice. Then we see that we need to take positions in issues like ownership. As I said at the beginning, who is owning this grid? Is it the TSO? Is the TSOs as was traditionally done, or can we open to any interested investors so that we make sure that the capital is there? Then the operation. If you open the ownership, what happens with the operation? Well, we believe that operation should remain in the hands of the TSOs, but it's something that needs to be clarified. And again, the planning, common planning at European level. We also see that there is a need to have better rate of returns. These projects, these interconnection projects are highly, use innovative technologies, are very risky, and so they need higher rate of returns if you want them to get developed. Otherwise, it will never happen. Then we see many players and evolving technology, and we see the need to have better standards. And finally, the not in my backyard aptitude, no, which is a huge problem when it comes to transmission. It takes 10 years to build a line, and nobody wants to see them. So we believe that there is a need to have more public debate on the need for transmission. People take it for granted that they will go home, switch on the light, and it will be there. But there is a lot of work behind that is not seen, and we need to educate people and to tell them that there are no miracles. And if we want to have reliable electricity, in addition green electricity, and we need grids, there's no other way. And also there is the administrative burden that it's very, very high. Within each country, you have several administrative bodies taking care of permitting. This makes it very complicated. The Commission had pushed forward to have a one-stop shop for permitting in each country. But again, there has been a lot of delays in the countries nominating their one-stop shop. We believe this should be really pushed forward. Well, yeah, this is just a summary of more or less what I said before. We believe that we need a strong political support because some of the decisions are difficult to take. So, for instance, we cannot forget the market, the market design. We have to redefine the market that we have today to make sure that it's adapted to the future increased amount of renewable energy sources. And for that, we need liquid intraday markets and good balancing markets that allow you to trade across borders and to balance the system on a European basis. Then, as I said, good planning of the network at European level, good return on investments, and short-term optimization of generation at EU level. The other day I was in a conference in Brussels and there was a gentleman from the regulator in Norway and was explaining their system, and they're mainly based on hydro. They have a demand of around 130 teras, and in rainy years they can produce up to 160. But on dry years, they can only produce around 80. So they have two options. In a dry year, if they want to supply the peak demand, they can either build alternative generation that will cost millions of euros, or they can rely in the market and rely in the interconnections. And they have decided the second. So on the rainy years, they export their electricity and they make good profits. And in the dry years, they import. They rely on their interconnections, and this saves a lot of money. This is the optimization I'm talking about. It doesn't make sense to have 28 times the security of supply. We can do it at European level. Is much more efficient. So my takeaway would be that we can have a supergrid for the future. We just need to really go for it, and we need to do it now. And for that, we need high-level commitment from the governments. We need regional initiatives. We need a stable regulatory policy for Europe. We need better market design and better planning of the network. And it will be a complex process, it will be long, but we have to start. And actually, we see a good momentum now with the new commission. You probably heard about the Energy Union project, which has the support from the member states. So it seems there is a political momentum to move forward towards a true European policy and towards a true European grid. So this is what we would like to see. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. So a quick question. Do we have one here? We have one from the floor.
Morning. Okay. You are the energy advisor for the Friends of the Supergrid, am I right?
Yes.
I have a question about the concept, the idea of this organization. Which is your idea, as an advisor and as a member of this organization of sustainability now in Europe?
Yeah, well, we have this discussion internally on whether, because at some point some of our members were not happy that the supergrid was very associated with the idea of renewables. I personally believe that if you don't move to a system, a decarbonized system with large-scale renewables, I don't see the need for a supergrid, because we could have the same system as we have now. But we have decided that we want a different system, that we want a sustainable system for the future. So that's when the supergrid comes forward. Then the supergrid is also, well, it will of course be linked to security of supply. And this is where we want to put the emphasis now. But it's probably more, you see in Europe, when you talk about policy, there is always three angles: the part that is dealing with the competitiveness, the part that is dealing with sustainability, and the part that is dealing with security of supply. And you need to make sure that those three parts of the triangle are covered, and this is sometimes difficult. We wanted to, when in the good period, when there was no crisis, we wanted sustainability. We were really pushing for renewables. Then we had the euro crisis, and then, oh my God, this is too expensive, we cannot go for it. And now that we have the crisis in Ukraine, we are moving towards security of supply. My personal view is that the supergrid will help these three aspects. It's just that you have to put the focus on one part of the triangle or another, depending on the specific moment you are living on. If you want to influence the political government, because at the end of the day, the politicians are the ones deciding, and they want to get re-elected, so they take the decisions based on what society is claiming at that particular moment.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment. I think from my side, I think now I understand why we need a supergrid. However, I think we are here because we want to think when we have to build it, where we have to build it, and who will pay for it. Yeah, exactly. That's our important question. You raised them already, and we are working on that, and I think we will see in the future this supergrid. Okay, thank you very much.